tell me your name and your case and
Wow.
how do you plead?
What?
Testing.
Okay, my name is Manuel. There's no case and I don't plead anything.
Look how cute he is.
Okay.
Look at him. And then
Oh
also the
God.
interviewer, I wonder if you can hear my question. I don't want to hear myself very loud because I do tend, that when you're here, it picks up more than you because I'm
Yeah.
closer. So let's go back and hear it now.
Okay.
Can you say something more to see how you register?
Um, can I say something more to see how I register?
Yeah. How about that movie?
Something more.
Pretty pathetic. This movie we saw.
Yes, it was pretty pathetic. It was
He
pretty
sounds
dumb.
like a parrot, doesn't he? Oh. Nervous.
Or something, you know.
All right.
I'm being set up by my own flesh and blood.
All right.
Okay, you want to ask me questions?
All
Ask
right,
me.
yeah.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, get this fly out of here. It's bugging me.
All right. So could
Yeah.
you tell me about what you know about Mom's father or anything like that?
Mom's dad.
Your side of the story, yes.
Mom's dad. Mom's dad.
And
He
how Mom fits
was.
into that whole picture. Sorry.
He was an employee for the Spanish government, and he worked in the prison system. And he rose to be basically what we would consider a warden. And he got all the way to be a warden at La Princesa in San Juan, which is the prison where they kept the more notorious criminals. But he was in charge not of the petty criminals, he was in charge of the political prisoners. And Mom told me stories of when she was a very little girl that she got to meet, she didn't know who they were in the time, but she got to meet political prisoners. Yeah, and she would say about how they would stand in the windows and scream to each other messages and so forth and whatnot. Now, in his job, he apparently moved from one part of the island to another because, I was born and family was living in Aguadilla, but La Princesa is in San Juan, and he married a woman from Humacao, so, that covers one extreme of the island to the other. So apparently they relocated several times.
And what about this woman from Macau?
Doña Josefa, yes. They met, he was much older than she was. And as I recall, she came from a poor family. And she worked, I guess, as a maid or a servant of some sort in the homes of better, well-to-do people. And I remember always stories she would tell me, or tell us, that she would never marry an old man, a bald man, or a widower. And that's exactly what she married. He was a widower, he was old, and he was bald.
Yeah. And so what are your earliest recollections of this woman?
Oh golly, I guess living in Rio Piedras, in Puerto Nuevo. She took care of us. She stayed at home and she cooked and cared for the house. And our parents worked. Dad, I think, was at the university studying, and Mom was working.
How about Mom's brothers?
I've heard of them. Juanito and Manolín. I never met them.
Never?
And I think they might have passed away before I was even born. So I don't know. That side of the family to me is just a empty,
How about Manolín, her mom's sobrino? Do you recall him?
Now, I recall from when I was a very little boy, he and his sister and Carmen Simon would come over to the house. And my earliest recollection is that Manoli and his sister uh, starred in a local radio program. And so they were radio artists, actors. And they would do all the voices for the different characters and so forth. And I remember hearing them and them being in the house and so forth. And that's my earliest recollection of him.
And what are your recollections of Aguadilla? You were born in Aguadilla?
Now, I have no recollections of Aguadilla. We moved. I was very small at the time, so I don't remember. I have some vague, very vague dreams, memories, but they're confused in my mind. So I don't know if they're really from the San Juan area or from Aguadilla. So my earliest memories, childhood memories, go back to San Juan.
And could you tell me about those childhood memories?
Oh, I remember the house we lived in. I remember the street we lived on, the school I went to, things like that. It was a small starter home we lived in, and eventually an extra bedroom was added. The whole front of the house, the facade was redone, more in a Spanish or Mexican architectural style with arches. And then wrought iron was put up. It was a pretty little house. And yeah, Puerto Nuevo,
which is like a suburb?
That's right. It's a subdivision of Rio Piedras, which is part of San Juan.
And how about Hector? Tell me about Hector and what he was doing.
Hector, what I remember was that Mom wanted to have a baby. You know, I remember her sort of talking a lot about wanting to have a baby. I think it had something to do with the neighbors, because the neighbors had two little sons almost back to back. So there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about the babies next door and so forth. And Hector came into the world.
I used to hear stories that you wanted a little brother. Is that like...
That's probably true. That's probably true. Since I was only an only child, and everybody in the neighborhood had brothers or sisters and so forth. So I was a little bit unusual in that I was an only child up to the time that Hector was born.
And you used to go to Sunday school? Was religion a big thing?
Now, I went to Catholic school, Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, in Puerto Nuevo. And I went there.
What was
and, well, it was a parochial school. And pretty much like here, I guess, you had nuns and people in the brotherhood or the priesthood as teachers, principals, etc. And we learned our subjects, and school bus would pick me up in the morning, drop me off at the end of the day. And then on Sundays, we would all get picked up to go to Mass and then be brought back home. And we wore, on Sundays, white uniforms. Everything was white shirt, white slacks, shoes, and so forth. And on the weekdays, we wore white shirts with the navy blue pants, and the little girls wore white blouses with navy blue outfits. The whole school, all grades. It was, at the time, it was a small school, and I think it only went up to as far as maybe the 8th grade.
So like a primary school.
Right.
And then you were in Puerto Rico till you were how old?
Golly, that I don't remember. I know I finished the 3rd grade, and then that summer after that is when there was all this sudden shift, and we wound up in New York. So I must have been 8, 9, 10, around there.
And what were your first impressions of New York? I mean, you were from Puerto Rico.
I remember everything looked dark and gray. um, it wasn't like Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, it's so bright
Mm-hmm.
and it's tropical. The the colors just jump out. They're bright. They stand out. Um, in New York, it wasn't like that. It was old and gray, and everything was subdued and worn out, and
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't look pretty.
What areas of New York did the family live in?
Okay, we moved to the west side of Manhattan, 103rd Street and Columbus Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, as I think back on it, it was not a very good neighborhood. The whole area was being demolished slowly, making way for public housing.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived up on a fifth floor.
Mm-hmm.
And what I remember there the most is that the constant fires, because the old tenements were being set ablaze,
Oh.
um, either by accident or, you know, by intent.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just constant, all the fire sirens ringing in the middle of the night. In fact, the building we lived in, the basement was on fire once. And we didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother took us, and rather than leave the building, we went up one more flight
To meet the fire.
to no go to go to a neighbor's house because there was less smoke in the apartment. So
Mm-hmm.
we figured we'd be better off there.
Wow.
Eventually, the fire department came. They did knock on the door, and they got us all out and took us outside into the street.
Mm-hmm.
And
That was in 130?
right, and we were there for a while, and then they let us go back into the building. So I guess there was just, for some reason, I keep thinking it was just a lot of garbage that was burning because since the buildings were so old and it was a very undesirable area, there was no garbage pickup. And what the tenants were doing was simply tossing garbage out their windows into the backyards. It was just mounds of garbage. So I could just see it very easily. Some child or somebody just tossing a cigarette, setting
Mm-hmm.
you know, a match on fire or something.
Like a health hazard.
Right, and the whole blaze. And a lot of the buildings were just empty buildings, or else they would have one or two tenants left, because everybody just had to move. It was forced upon them.
Mm-hmm.
So from
So,
there we moved. We moved down to the up to the South Bronx,
mm-hmm.
Brown Place, over by Brook Avenue, and 139th Street. And we lived there a long time.
A long time. So
Yeah.
what was happening during that time there? Like, who came in and out of the picture? Was my father there? What was
Well, let's see. When we first moved, we were there, and I don't know how long we were in that apartment we took over. And then after that, my parents got divorced. So,
1957?
oh God, I really would have to make an effort to tell you what the year was. But my dad was then out of the picture. Now, he stayed living in New York for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and he finished his studies at NYU and all that. Mom, Mita, and then Hector and I lived there. I was going to public school right across the street, PS 43.
Mm-hmm.
Hector eventually wound up going there, of course, once he was old enough. Then,
That was a grammar school? Yes.
yeah, right, public school, grammar school. He went from kindergarten to the 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Then, let's see. Um, After Mom was divorced, she started going out, and I remember her having an occasional date. And eventually, through friends, she met, you know, Manuel Rosado. You eventually married him,
Mm-hmm.
and then Bruni was born, and then you were born.
Do you remember Mujita in beginning? What's the story? What do you think
Yeah, I
about
recall them because they were. Let me see. When we were living in Brown Place, they were living at 139th Street in Brook Avenue, I believe. Yeah, 139th Street and Brook Avenue. And on the first floor. And Mijita and her mother. And Mijita and Bitin had not married yet. Bitin was living with, I think, a brother or a cousin further up the street in a basement apartment. And I lost touch with them. Just,
After you moved from that area down to...
Yeah, because we didn't stay. Soon after... See, after Manolín and Mom got married, they went to Puerto Rico. And they came back really, really excited and so forth. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. No, when they got married, they went to Niagara Falls for their honeymoon. That's what happened. Sometime later, then, Bruni was born. She was born in New York. And then after that, the major thing was then they went to Puerto Rico. They came back really excited about it. And they decided that we were going to move back to the island. And we did. We moved back to the island. Then we were born. We moved back to the island. We were there for over a year. During that time, you were born.
What part of the island?
We lived in Capaja, Texas. That's also a subdivision, Rio Piedras. The subdivision's right next to Puerto Nuevo. And yeah, now you all were too small to really go anywhere. Mita was still living with us, and we lived in a duplex. And Hector and I went to school called Colegio Metodista, and that was on Avenida de Diego, and the part of the avenue that left Capaja and went right to Puerto Nuevo. And from there, due to financial problems, employment problems, Manolín came back and he arranged an apartment in the same building that Mijita used to live in, or was still living in, I think. On the 4th floor. And then Mom and the rest of us came back. In fact, I still remember that plane trip back because Mom was so scared, the way Mom is prone to be scared when she doesn't understand what's going on. And you were just a little baby in arms. And when you were born, there was apparently some concern about your having asthma. And Mom was really scared that you would be able to breathe inside the plane. And whether, it was going to be important to pull a gas mask or something and help you to breathe. So, so we came back to New York, and there we were all over again. And I missed Puerto Rico terribly for the longest time. Because, we were set up, we had friends, we had a nice neighborhood we lived in, had my bicycle, I went all over the place, and I was adjusted, thoroughly integrated back to where I had come from. And now we were back in New York again. When we lived in Brown Place, it was 190 Brown Place, and we lived on that second floor apartment, which was towards the back. It didn't face the front. And it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And we lived there, and in the larger bedroom, Mita, Hector, and I slept, and in the smaller bedroom, it was Manolín and Mom. Then we eventually moved up to the 5th floor to occupy a larger apartment because Bruni was going to be now part of the family, and we needed more space. And we lived up there for quite a while. I guess a couple of years, maybe 2 years, before the move was to go to Puerto Rico. Now, one thing is that when we came back from Puerto Rico, let's see, I had finished the 7th grade, so I did all of the 8th grade then in Puerto Rico that year. And then came back for the 9th grade. Now at that time, Mita stayed behind, and Mom made arrangements for her to live at a place back in Humacao, near the beach, where she was from. And so when we came back to New York, it was just the four of us.
Were you close to Mita? Did you miss her?
Yeah, I was close to her, and I missed her a lot. Yeah.
And what was your sense of her? Like, how did she feel being with the family?
I think she loved us all very, very much. I think though a time came when she felt she was old and she had to stay in the island because she was going to die. She and Mom never got along very well.
Ever? Like, what type of relationship was it?
I think it was a difficult relationship. I think we were closer to Mom than we were. No, I'm sorry. We were closer to her than we were to Mom. Because Mom was always going out and working. She had a job. And Mita was always there to cook and take care of you and so forth. And I think Mom resented that. Also, Mita was very hard-headed, stubborn. She just always wanted things her way. And I remember Mom always telling me the story of how she was already married, living in Puerto Nuevo with me, and Mita was still trying to dictate or tell her how she should live her life, what things she needed to do or not do, and so forth.
As mothers do.
Yeah. But it went so far that Mom says that Mita even tried to hit her like you would a child, when a child is disobedient.
But then you also commented earlier that Mom also was.
Well, in other conversations, yeah, we've had Mom. I've described Mom as being stubborn. That's right.
Because it might have just been that they clashed because of that.
Oh, no, I'm sure. Yeah. But you see, Mom's relationship with her was a very difficult one because Mom was brought into the house from outside, and this was not Josefa Garcia's biological daughter. So, as I understand, at least from Mom's side of it, is that there was resentment, a lot of resentment and bitterness because, Manuel Palacin went off and had a child with God knows who, and then brought her into the house. Now, we don't know for a fact that this man is actually Mom's biological father. Mom always alleges that he is and says that he is and believes that he is. And she also believes that that Josefa Garcia was not her biological mother, although it was the woman that raised her from a babe. And so there was there, and then later on, growing up, there was the problem of her being aware of she was raising this child that was not her child, and she was, according to Mom anyway, very authoritarian and a disciplinarian and very harsh, almost brutal with her.
Now, but were they married, Josefa and...
Oh, yes.
Before Mom came?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, they were married. Yeah, Manuel Palacin's first wife had passed away. And that's where the two boys are from, Juanito and Manolín.
And do you know anything about Manolín, where he came from?
No.
Was he Manolín?
You mean Mom's father? He was Manolo, Don Manolo. I believe that's where that came from, I'm not sure. I'm confused as to where he came from. At times I think he was actually born in Puerto Rico, but from everything I've been told, at least by Mom, he was born in Spain, but came to Puerto Rico as a very young man. And he was only one of several siblings. And he came to Puerto Rico, but the other ones went off to Colombia, I think. And Mom has told me, she remembers, picking up the mail and bringing it into the house and so forth, and seeing that a lot of letters were from Puerto Rico to Spain and from Spain to Puerto Rico for her dad, and then from Puerto Rico to Colombia, and then Colombia back to Puerto Rico, from people having similar last names, the Palacin last name. So. And to this day, Mom claims she has relatives that she's traced and she's actually written to in Spain. And the part of Spain that he's from is the province of Extremadura, which is southwest Spain. It's the part of Spain that forms the border with Portugal, which is where all the great immigrations or migrations came from in Spain because it's such a poor part of Spain. Okay. I never liked New York. um, when we moved into the Columbus Avenue area, first there was a problem getting me to the right school. There was confusion about what district or what school would accept me. I couldn't speak a word of English at all. I was forced to repeat the third grade. I wound up being put in a class with children that had learning disabilities of all kinds. I was very scared of the kid I had to sit next to because they just drooled all the time. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Dempsey, a very old woman, who was very conscientious about trying to teach us English. I remember the balance every single day. We would go through the weather, the day of the week, and everybody had to stand up and everybody had to read and point at the blackboard until she felt comfortable that you really were reading, you weren't just reciting from memory. The school was a very, very old school. I couldn't tell you what year it was built, but as I think about it now, it was a very, very old building. It was located about 2, maybe 3 blocks away from where our apartment was. And most of the time there were always problems with other school kids because I didn't know English. So there was constant threats and problems like that. Kids tend to be cool with each other. Before the school year was out though, we moved to Brown Place. And I was put in a better class. The kids didn't have learning disabilities. And what made that possible was that by that time I had become fluent in English. So they thought I could probably keep up with the work or catch up. But it was the same thing, you know. We were one of 2 Puerto Rican families in a very large neighborhood that was predominantly Italian and Irish. And so there was a lot of abuse and kids and so forth. So I had an occasional schoolyard fight with other kids. By the time I graduated from this grade, I went to junior high school, the neighborhood had already undergone a transition, and now it was much more Puerto Rican. So although we were still a minority, there were more Puerto Ricans. The school was a brand new building. It was fun. You know, the first day, because it was a new coach. I didn't like it. I never liked it. It was big. It was ugly. It still is big. It still is ugly. Yeah, it's overpowering, I guess. So much intimidating. You have to deal with so many people. It's very hostile. into being a teenager, and our interests and our likes and dislikes got to be similar again. Um, and I pretty much realized that he wasn't really studying or really trying to do well in school. I really don't know. No, not really. I think I did that all because I wanted my parents to like me and approve of me. So I got into trying to get real good grades in school so they would think, hey, that's a good kid. Excuse me? No, no illegal drugs, no sniffing, none of that. I was just a good kid. Went to school. Got good grades. You know. Yeah, I wanted to go to college. But there were a lot of things going on because by the time I was in high school then you the whole problem with civil rights and the whole drug scene that came out of the 60s and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all of that. All ending up with the war in Vietnam. So it was a very, very turbulent environment outside home. Oh, I thought it was great. I didn't understand what was going on. Because as a kid, Puerto Rican ghetto, you reach the point where you think it's the world. And only when you get out of that that you discover that, you know, there's all these other kinds of different people in the world. High school. Actually, it wasn't until I got to college that I really realized just how small a minority Puerto Ricans are. Because in the ghetto, there's so many of us. And, you know, we've got salsa and we got the food and we have everything going. And there seem to be so many of us, you know, just everywhere. But then you get out of that, really out of it, and you discover that there's only just so few Puerto Ricans. Tiny, tiny minority. Yeah, women's rights. Yeah, I remember reading about women burning their bras and thought it was real funny. I was in Brazil at the time. I was in the Peace Corps when all that exploded. When I left, I just the civil rights movement, at least the public street version of it, the demonstrations, was already being pushed aside by the anti-war movement. And the big, important demonstrations were now against the war. And by the time I'd spent about a year and a half, 2 years in Brazil, then you've got the beginning of sort of the feminist movement and demonstrations by women burning their bras and so forth. So I wasn't here when all that started. I was here when the movement matured a little bit and it wasn't so outrageous in its demonstrations. No. Well, it reached it in the form of news, in newspapers and magazines. You could read about it. But it wasn't something that people were living or were in favor of. I guess most people probably thought it was amusing. Yeah, that's right, just the news.
So you were in Brazil for 2 years. That was the
Actually, yes, that was the initial contract, but then I was extended by the Peace Corps for a couple of months, and then I was extended again for a year. So sum total, I was in Brazil over 3 years, I believe.
And what did you go to
Okay, I was in the Peace Corps. I went to Northeast Brazil, and I worked as a in a community development program. And we tried to introduce hygiene and health education in the elementary schools, uh, basic knowledge of nutrition in the elementary schools, the use of visual aids as teaching tools, same thing in the elementary schools.
Like what, like books?
Oh, the use of flannel boards, puppets, uh, pin-up boards, things along those lines, to make the classroom environment visually interesting and to reinforce what the students were learning. We organized an adult literacy program for the peasantry. I taught social studies and English at a local junior high school. So I was pretty active, pretty busy, and successful, I think, in what I did.
Could I ask you what type of social studies did you do?
Brazilian social studies. Yeah.
What town was this in?
I was in a place called Cedro de San João. Cedar of St. John. St. John's Cedar is the name of the town. And it's in the state of Sergipe, northeast Brazil.
And then you came back to the States.
Yeah.
And how was that like? Was there like culture shock to come back to the U.S.? You hated it or what?
No, I liked coming back. It was great.
You wanted to get out of community development?
No, I just wanted to get out of Brazil. I mean, there were a lot of things I liked about Brazil. I liked their music, and I liked the literature, and that's all I really ever liked. And the rest of the country I didn't like too much.
What were the people like?
People were nice, except that you're dealing with people that are very underdeveloped, and it becomes difficult to talk and to relate. Very, very class-conscious society, very stratified. Everybody knew their place. There was a place for everybody. No mobility. The social class you were born into, you could expect to spend the rest of your life there.
How did you fit into that?
Well, I didn't. I was always an outsider, and for me that was good, because since I was an outsider, I could socialize with people in any social class that liked me or I liked them. Whereas if you were a Brazilian, you couldn't cut across the social lines and have friends that way. But because I was an outsider, they let me get away with a lot of social faux pas. And just the mindset is backward, I was tired of it. I was tired. Everything was so difficult to do. Whether getting a driver's license or a telephone, it was such a difficult task. And, it was time to move on. Well, it depends. In the first 2 years, when I was in the interior, in Cedro, I could, if I wanted to get up early, it's because I wanted to have some coffee or some breakfast. But I didn't have to get up early, because my work, what I needed to do, depended on meetings with the local teachers and school principals. And those could take place at lunch hour. They usually take place in the evening and on weekends. So my real work was that's when I was really so I kept very late hours. Going to bed, I usually went to bed very late because I was working, or because it was just simply so hot that the house never got cool until maybe 2, 3 in the morning. Now, my last year I was in Macau, Rio Grande do Norte, and there I worked out of the Peace Corps office, and I had more than 8 to 5 jobs, definitely 18, and I had been drafted to work with the Hope ship that was coming to Brazil, northeast Brazil. So they wanted me to work with the local doctors who already spoke some English and help them to polish up their skills in English prior to the ship arriving. Because on the ship you would just have American doctors who spoke only English. So we needed to get the Brazilian nurses and doctors up to speed and feel comfortable in the language quickly. So when the ship arrived, then the American doctors could transfer their know-how to the Brazilians.
What was the Hope ship?
The Hope ship, it's just a ship. It's a hospital ship, and it's staffed with American personnel, and they take these people to different countries, and the local doctors then are trained or exposed to new medical procedures, new surgery techniques, surgical techniques, new therapies that the local doctors may not be exposed to or be aware of because the countries that they live in are underdeveloped.
And so, jumping further into the future, so then you go to Texas, of all places.
Yeah.
Could you tell me, like, did you hear about the University of Texas, and how did that happen?
Yes. Well, I wanted to go to graduate school and study Latin American history, politics, economics, and I just did some research and discovered that Texas was one of them. There were several other schools, Wisconsin, UCLO, that had good programs, good centers, and I applied to them. Texas accepted me and left open the possibility for scholarship, financial aid, and so forth, more so than the other schools. So I went to Texas because I had enough money put together to pay for only 1 year of room and board, books, graduate credits, and so forth. And if at the end of that year I didn't have a scholarship or anything, the game was up. I had to come back to New York or something.
And you have a master's?
Yeah, I got a master's. Well, in political science. I started Latin American politics as a center, but then I discovered that that's not really what I wanted to do, and transferred from the center for Latin American to the Department of Political Science, the Department of Government in the graduate school. Well, because the Latin Studies program didn't lead to anything in particular, and I felt I wanted to go to teach at the university level. Right. Okay.